Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her. And this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga land, also called the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. If you are new here, you might not know that I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, and the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And if you are a returning listener, you know the drill. This podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher, so that each and every week you are connected to the information and inspiration that is going to support you as you build your yoga business and support you on the tough days when you feel like things are tough and you're getting tired or overwhelmed, because I get it. I know what it feels like to leave yoga teacher training, to leave that community that you've built there with other people who are learning about yoga, and then to dive out into this world being a yoga teacher and an entrepreneur. And there are times in business and in life where things feel really heavy. And that's what today's episode is all about. When you feel like, oh gosh, I really need to rest, recharge my batteries, and find some refuel time. That's what today's episode is all about. So before we get into all of that, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. First is OfferingTree, and I want to tell you a big update with them. So I had a meeting last week with Eddie, who is one of the founders over there at OfferingTree, and I was just blown away by the new website page builder that they have. And I got to really see it in action. So Eddie showed me a recreation that he made of my existing WordPress website, and he made it using OfferingTree. And I was just sitting there shocked because he told me that it took 30 minutes to make it. So yes, for sure, he understands the software really well because he created it and he works with it every day. So it might take someone else longer than 30 minutes, but I know because I have built WordPress websites. I built my own website. I used to build them for yoga teachers. It is not work that I do anymore because it's not something that brings me joy. But I know how long it takes to put a website together. So the fact that he did it in 30 minutes, and then the main thing is that it looked exactly the same. So I'm even more impressed with OfferingTree than I ever was. So I'm so grateful that they sponsor and support the podcast, and that we have a sponsor that I'm really excited to talk to yoga teachers about. Also, we have a discount code in case you are looking for a place to host your website or do all of the things that OfferingTree does, like do your bookings, payments, waiver forms, host videos, do Zoom integration, all the things. That's over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. And today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. So you might not know this, but my other hat that I wear, other than podcasting and creating content for yoga teachers and helping yoga teachers in studios, is I run an online membership, and it's for anyone who's interested in learning more about pelvic health. Could be yoga teachers, PTs, movement educators, healthcare professionals. In there, we hire worldwide guest experts to teach us the most up-to-date pelvic health information. And members get to attend calls live, get your questions answered, have access to all of the replays and trainings and workshops in there. Check it out over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Alrighty, let's dive into a place where we can rest and refuel. So maybe, if you can, if it's possible, while you're listening to today's episode, can you go outside and walk in nature, or can you roll around on the floor for a little bit, or find a restful yoga pose like legs up the wall, or maybe make yourself a tea, or find a piece of paper and do some doodling or coloring? What could you do in this moment that would bring you ease and comfort as you listen? And if you're sitting there thinking, oh gosh, what would I do? If a friend was telling you that they needed to rest and refuel, what might you offer to them? And can you do that for yourself in this moment as you listen? And if you're thinking, no, I can't do that, Shannon, I'm driving or I'm cleaning or I have to water my plants or whatever it is that you're doing, it's okay. Take a moment where you are to notice where you are connecting to the earth or the floor or the ground. And notice your breath and see if it wants to lengthen. And as you breathe and come into how your body is feeling, can you check in and ask what emotions are here for you right now in this moment? So if you were to come up with 1 to 3 words to summarize how you're feeling, maybe that's physically, mentally, spiritually, or emotionally, what would those 1 to 3 words be? Knowing that your emotions come and go, kind of like waves or a cloud. And maybe if you're near a journal or a piece of paper, you might want to jot those words down, but that is not necessary. What's most important right now is that you are here in this moment, noticing how you're feeling, and you're listening to what's coming up. And if at any point you feel like, okay, I need to hit pause and I need to hang out here a bit more, or maybe you're like, you know what? It's too much right now. I can't sit with those feelings. That's okay. Do whatever you need in this moment. This noticing the emotions is really a key piece. And I had a great conversation this week. Shout out to Tess. We were chatting in an Instagram message about what it feels like when we need to refuel and recharge our batteries and what steps we take. And thank you, Tess, for giving me permission to share some of this on the podcast. So Tess talked about how the first step for her is to check in with how she's feeling. And I love that she said, her words were, acknowledge those feelings. It's okay to not be okay. And today's podcast episode is here for you if you are feeling like things are heavy, if you are feeling tired and overwhelmed. And it's okay to be in that place. It's a normal thing that happens to us as humans. We cannot have all days be full of ease and comfort and joy. And this podcast is here for you also to return to on the tough days when you feel like you need to refuel. I'll link to Tessa's website in the show notes in case you want to check out the work that she's doing as a yoga teacher and a coach. And I'm also going to see if we can get her on a future podcast episode to chat with us a bit more because she has a lot of wisdom to share. And we had a great conversation in the private messages in Instagram. And a side note on this, if you do go and check out Tessa's website, you might notice that it's made using OfferingTree. And so a lot of our podcast listeners have been asking, what does a website look like when it's built on OfferingTree? Tess has a really beautiful site, so make sure to check it out. And if the tech side of things is what is feeling overwhelming, for sure, check out OfferingTree. I use this. It's an all-in-one software that was designed for yoga teachers who want to build a great website, send out newsletters, automate all things Zoom and waivers and payments. So if you're going to check out OfferingTree, make sure to use our podcast listener discount. It's offeringtree.com/Shannon. So coming back to Tessa's words where she said, acknowledge those feelings. It's okay to not be okay. I love that she's saying, you know what? We're all having struggles at some point along the way, and that's normal. And before I get into today's podcast even further, I want to also clarify that this isn't a podcast where I have all of the answers for you. I actually believe that you have the answers, and I'm here to guide a bit of an inquiry as we look at this. And I'd like you to see, okay, does that fit? Is this helpful for me? Will this help me to find that refuel time when I'm overwhelmed or tired or having a tough day as a yoga teacher and or an entrepreneur? And I also want to really share with you in a vulnerable way that I'm not having the easiest week as I sit here chatting with you. So we're in this together. I have some ideas. I hope it's helpful, but it's not like I have all of the answers. I've learned a lot from hitting these times of burnout or overwhelm, and from running a business and raising 3 children and just being a giving person who often has gotten praise for working hard and doing a job really well, which can really feed into my perfectionist tendencies, and being called someone who can, quote unquote, do it all. And a side note on this, and kind of an ask to all of you who are listening, I've also been learning how the patriarchy is huge in all of this, how this idea of like really hustle and hustle to the point of burnout, or working and working and working until we just run out of fuel. That is an issue, and it's a whole other podcast. And I hope that together we can start to see, and I mean myself as well, I'd like to learn more about this. I'd like to see, how is the system of patriarchy showing up? How can we point it out, notice it, and get it out of there? Because I think we've been raised in it. So in case you know of someone who talks about this showing up, in the way that we hustle and work, let me know. I'd love to have someone on the podcast to talk about that. Okay, so back to, I'm right here with you in this journey. I still have tough days. I still have days where I feel overwhelmed. Rebecca Sebastian and I recently did a podcast episode where we shared how we have both felt like quitting. And especially lately, we've felt like this a lot as entrepreneurs. That's episode 304. I'll make sure to link to it in the show notes. That's a really good one to listen to if you want to hear that you're not alone, and you also want to have some laughs along the way. And we have gotten some really great feedback from that episode. And on that note, if anyone tells you that they have life all figured out, that they have the perfect schedule or the perfect relationship or the perfect career, income, or whatever, definitely question that. Often people aren't telling us that everything's perfect, but we might perceive that others have all the answers and they have everything figured out. For sure, we can watch people and we can learn, what is working for this person. But please remember that when we see things online, maybe someone's website, maybe a YouTube video, maybe a social media post or their email, and we think, gosh, that person has everything figured out and I don't, just give yourself a little moment of compassion here. So I get asked by yoga teachers and entrepreneurs often how I've gotten to this place where I've, been podcasting for almost 6 years. I've been working for myself for 18 years and running an online business with a small but very mighty supportive team. And when people ask me, sometimes I get the feeling, or it's in their words, that those people asking me, they think that I have all of the answers, or they think that my life is really easy, or I have this secret roadmap to this really magical destination of entrepreneur. And I will say, yeah, I've figured lots out along the way. I've made a lot of mistakes as well. I have a whole podcast where I share some big ones that I've made. That's episode 247. In that episode, I talk about how making mistakes and being wrong is part of learning, and it's normal, even if people are not talking about it. So I plan to continue to grow as a human so that I can show up for me, but also show up for others and show up for the work that's really important to me. And I like to think of this as figuring it out is a lot like gardening or a science experiment. You try something, And whether it works or it doesn't, you're going to learn from it. Sometimes you blow things up by accident or on purpose. Sometimes you decide to make a big change. Sometimes you know that you need to start over. Sometimes your body or your mind tell you, look, we're taking a break. We need time. And sometimes we are super critical of ourselves as entrepreneurs, and that can kind of drag us down. So let me give you another example. So many of you know that I love gardening, especially growing food. And as people get to know me and get to know that about me, they'll send me questions about gardening. And if they're beginners, they're often very critical of their gardening skills. And just so you know, I kill plants and have crop failures all the time. It's not like someone learns to garden and then they just have a bounty of harvest from every seed they plant. And the same goes for running a business or being a human who's in relationship with other messy humans. So notice when that inner critic starts to kick up and say, like, you don't know what you're doing, because we all don't know what we're doing. As I said, recently, I was just having a really tough week. I was feeling overwhelmed, and it was during my morning shower, because hands up for who else has good ideas that pop in this moment. That's where my ideas pop in. I asked myself 2 questions. First, I checked in, how am I feeling? Really, how am I feeling? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, what's going on with me today? And then the second question, I asked myself, what baby step could I take to bring more ease and comfort in this tough moment? And then I repeated this. It worked the first day. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to repeat this. And it was around the time of my shower where I was thinking, okay, let's check in. How am I feeling? So for an example, one day I was feeling really tired. I just didn't get very much sleep. So the one small step that I planned was some restorative yoga right in the middle of my workday. Now, I did change my mind and I had a quick nap instead because I was actually really tired. The next day, I checked in with myself. And with the emotions that were coming in, I chose to give a friend a phone call. And the laughs and the conversations really felt very helpful in that day. Today, I was just about to start work and I was having a tough time focusing. I was thinking, gosh, I'm really struggling here. So I went for my daily walk earlier than normal. In all of these examples that I'm giving to you, I'm doing something really small to refuel. I'm also checking in, what is it that I'm feeling? And then how can I do something very small? So I guess to highlight here, you don't need to book a week-long retreat or a full day at the spa or take the whole weekend off to read books by the fire. Yes, for sure, plan those things, but I really wanted to find something that would help me in those tough days. I think it's very easy to sometimes think, well, if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling tired, maybe we need more sleep. And sometimes that is the case. But there's a really great TED Talk to highlight the real reason why we're tired and the 7 types of rest that we can get to help with that. It's Sandra Dalton Smith that did this TED Talk. I'll link to it in the show notes. Sandra says that there are these 7 types of rest, and what I really appreciate about her talk, which, like I said, I'll link to it in the show notes, is that she gives small ways to rest and restore that fit in daily, and she gives us examples for how we get depleted in each area. So the 7 areas are mental, spiritual, emotional, sensory, creative, and physical. So a really quick example of one of these that I think many of us can understand is if we're taking in a lot of sensory input. Let's say we're watching our kids for the day and then we go and teach a yoga class and everyone's chatting and then we scroll social media for a little bit and then we're sitting there and we're binge watching Netflix, which many of us do to calm down. I'm not throwing shame at anyone. Just notice all that's coming at you. And so what you might try and do is sitting in quiet, or making the decision to not look at social media for the evening or for the weekend. Also in this talk, Sandra highlights how we can't just depend on sleep to restore us. And we know this as yoga teachers. We know that we cannot pour from an empty cup. We know that we cannot give to others or connect with others when we're feeling exhausted. We know that we don't feel like ourselves when we are depleted. We know that we can't be creative or do our most meaningful work when we are drained. I had a friend once who used to call me on the phone and list all of her accomplishments for the day when I asked, "How are you doing?" And I'm not throwing shame at her either. She did this because our society tells us that we are better people when we are doing things and when we are accomplishing more. And I guess the biggest thing that I'm taking away this week for myself, and the biggest question I'm asking me and you as well, because you're here with me today, is what if we prioritized rest? What would that look like for you today if rest and refuel time was your top priority? Even if it's very, very small, even if it's that one breath that we took together in today's episode. And I want to share with you my homework experiment. So feel free to join me. I don't know how this is going to play out. I will say I'm a little bit reluctant, but I think I know how it's going to play out. So every day, every work day, I should say, I write down the top 3 things that I want to get done in my business by the end of that day. Only 3 things. I don't let myself write down more, even though I do want to. I have another list for that, the overflow. But today I thought, what if I make the very first thing at the top of that list something that is just for me to rest and refuel? And right away, I felt quite a bit of worry come up, like, oh gosh, but then I'll only get 2 tasks done. But what if, I asked myself, what if I can be way more present and get more done in the long run because my cup will be full enough to pour from? I am so curious to hear from you what your thoughts are on this, how you find rest, how you refuel and recharge on the tough days. Yes, we can teach this and we can practice this, and some days it's much easier, but I'm talking about the really the days where it feels like, oh gosh, how can I feel less drained or exhausted on those really tough days? How can we refuel and recharge on those days? And I also want to close out with a quote. I saw this on Instagram. It's by Brandon Kyle Goodman. They are the author of You Gotta Be You. And the quote that they wrote says, "Told my friend I'm emotionally hitting a wall, and she said, sometimes walls are there so that we can lean on them and rest." So if you feel like you are hitting a wall, you are not alone. I hope today's episode has felt like it is a place where you can feel supported, feel like you're not alone, and have some ideas to rest and refuel. Next week on the podcast, we are going to kind of continue with this. I want to talk about the seasons of business and the seasons of life. And then we're going to get into, I had this idea for a mini series. I talked about it a while back when I recorded episode 300. Shout out to Renee, who sent me a question that really I was like, this is coming up. Watch for it. It's coming. The question that Renee put out there was, what would you tell a brand new yoga teacher? And I had this idea for this mini series, which is, if there was this checklist of like, how are we doing here? Can we just check in? Do we have all of these things in place? Whether we're a brand new yoga teacher or we are a more experienced yoga teacher, this is the list that I wish I had at the beginning of running my yoga business and along the way. So today's episode is here on purpose at the very beginning for us to make sure that we are feeling like we have some rest and refuel time. And then next week, we're going to get into talking about seasons in life and business. So I'm excited to share this with you, and I'm excited to dive into this little mini series. We'll be hanging out a little bit more here together, not the usual interview style that you often hear on here, but one of these solo stretches that I want to do because I've been doing a lot of thinking on this, and I've compiled some notes, and I'm excited to share it with you. Huge thank you and shout out to our team over here, Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead, for making today's episode possible, and also to you, dear listener, because you are here all the way to the end of today's episode, and I appreciate you and your time so much. And as we close out today's episode, I'm changing my usual question a little bit, and I want to know, what will you be doing this week to refuel, recharge, rest, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?